In this video, we'll be taking a look at how to create lighting based on an HDRI image using Mental Ray for Maya. This HDR image was compiled using PT GUI and was a panorama stitched from 4 different angles of view using an 8mm fisheye lens. Multiple exposures were taken of this living room to allow PT GUI to stitch the photo as an HDRI image. We'll go ahead and open up our scene, which is in the Lighting Project Scenes folder, and it's called HDRI Light Scenes Start. Now make sure you set your project before you open your scene to the Lighting Project. This is important so that all of the texture images that are needed actually come in with the scene properly. If you forget to set your project, you can always set your project and reopen the scene, or manually navigate to the Lighting Project Source Images folder to gain access to the textures for the box and the lamp, as well as the Living Room Panoramic HDR. Taking a quick look at the scene, we see we have a close-up camera and a perspective view. The scene is of a cute little table lamp and a decorative box sitting behind it, with a simple pair of walls and a desktop. In the close-up cam, you'll see we've got a nice little view of the scene, and what we want to do first off is to bring in an IBL node, or an image-based lighting node. This is found in the render settings window. First, make sure you're set to Mental Ray, and then proceed to go into the Indirect Lighting tab. Click Create next to the image-based lighting, and in your scene you'll find an environment sphere that surrounds your scene. This IBL node is what allows you to bring in an HDR to light your scene. Under Image Name, click the folder icon and navigate to the Source Images folder. If you've set your project correctly, you'll go straight there. And you'll want to load up livingroompanoramic.hdr. Now, you can use any other kind of images to load into the IBL. However, for best lighting, you'll need to have that image as an HDR. We're going to open that up, and you'll see the living room panorama is imported into the scene. You can control the visibility of the panorama by using the hardware alpha in the IBL's attribute editor. A low alpha makes the image appear more transparent, and a high alpha will make it more opaque, which means you won't be able to see your scene through it. This doesn't really affect the rendering aspect, it's only the display. So having it at a hardware alpha of about 5 allows you to see your scene as well as seeing the orientation of the HDR. The orientation of the image is important because you want to line up the sun to the primary key light for your scene. Without changing anything, we're going to go ahead and render this view to see what's going to happen. First, we'll have to make sure that Final Gathering is turned on, which it is in this scene, as Final Gathering is what will allow the HDR to create light in the scene. There are no other visible lights in the scene. If you press 7, you'll see that there's no other lighting, and you'll want to make sure in the render settings that the default light in the Common tab is disabled. Now we'll take a quick render and see what we find out. We can see a pretty noisy render, but there's definitely lighting in this scene. And that's coming from the IBL and only the IBL. We'll want to take a look in the perspective window to orient the sun to be a little bit more head-on to the lamp. If you open the channel box, we're going to need to rotate the IBL to a Y rotation of 155 degrees. That places the sun at an angle that'll be preferable to our scene lighting. we go ahead into our camera and render this scene again, we'll see the shift in lighting occur. As the render completes, you'll start noticing, again, quite a bit of noise, and those are mitigated through the render settings, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But having a look at the buffer, you can see how moving the IBL, rotating the IBL, has changed the lighting direction. And this is the preferred direction that we'd like. The number one thing that you might notice is that the metal post in the table lamp is reacting really very wonderfully to the IBL and is looking quite metallic. And that is perhaps one of the key features of lighting within HDRI, is the quality of reflections and lighting that you get in metallic surfaces. It's really fantastic for metal. Now, we're not going to light the scene solely with the HDRI. We'll also be adding a couple of lights for key and fill to supplement what we're getting from the HDR. First thing we're going to do is boost the level of the HDR. So we'll go into our perspective view and make sure we've got the IBL selected and go into the attribute editor. First thing we want to do is turn off primary visibility for the IBL. Even though we've got walls that block everything, if you turn off the primary visibility, the IBL will not render, but will still light the scene for you, and that's going to be good. Especially if you're rendering a view where you don't have geometry blocking where the IBL is. Let's go ahead and open up the render settings, and under the indirect lighting options, we're going to want to bring up the primary diffuse scale to make the scene just a little bit brighter. This can be done without adjusting the HDR in Photoshop itself, and just brings up the overall brightness. Right now the primary diffuse scale is set to white, which is a value of 1. Let's type in a value of 3, which will bring up the diffuse lighting on this object. Let's put this in the buffer, and let's go ahead and render. As the render completes, you can see that the image is overall much brighter than it was before, and that is due to the primary diffuse scale. In this video, we took a quick look at how to bring in an HDR and create an image-based lighting sphere in Mental Ray for Maya.